The memo arrived at 4:57 in the afternoon, a sterile block of text on my screen that felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. It was from Julian Vance's executive assistant, a woman named Carol who communicated exclusively in bullet points and clipped sentences. The subject line was simple: Working Dinner, Project Nightingale. The body was even simpler, listing a time and an address for a restaurant I'd never heard of, a place called the Cypress Room. It concluded with a stark, non-negotiable directive: attendance mandatory for lead project analysts. Mr. Vance will be hosting just me, then. I was the only lead analyst on Nightingale. My stomach performed a slow, sickening roll. For 3 years, my interactions with Julian Vance had been carefully curated, existing only within the glass-walled ecosystem of the office. He was a presence, a low hum of authority that permeated the entire floor. I knew the sound of his expensive shoes on the polished concrete, the clean, sharp scent of his cologne that lingered in the elevator after he'd gone, the way the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the silver at his temples. He was a collection of meticulously observed, distant details, a man I had constructed from sensory fragments and professional deference. He was my boss, the founder of the company, a man who commanded rooms with a quiet stillness that was more intimidating than any raised voice. And I was, for reasons I never dared to examine too closely, completely and utterly captivated by him. It was a silent, hopeless affliction, a secret I kept locked away in the most fortified part of myself. It was manageable from a distance, from the safety of my cubicle, where my observations could be dismissed as simple employee awareness. A working dinner, just the two of us, felt like being thrown into the deep end of an ocean I had only ever admired from the shore. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of low-grade panic, rereading the same line of code until the characters blurred into meaningless symbols. My mind wasn't on the project, it was on my closet. What does one wear to a mandatory dinner with a man who probably had his shirts custom-made? My entire wardrobe suddenly seemed juvenile, inadequate. I thought about the way his suit jackets always fit perfectly across his broad shoulders, the effortless way he rolled up his sleeves, revealing a strong, veined forearm and an expensive-looking watch. I, on the other hand, felt like a boy playing dress-up in his father's clothes. When 6 o'clock finally arrived, the office was a ghost town. The usual cacophony of keyboard clicks and ringing phones had faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the whisper of the air conditioning. I packed my laptop with trembling hands, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I could feel his presence before I saw him. It was a shift in the air, a subtle change in atmospheric pressure. He was standing by the elevator bank, phone to his ear, his voice a low, smooth murmur that I couldn't quite make out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, just a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like the CEO and more like just a man, a dangerously handsome man. He ended his call as I approached, pocketing his phone with an economy of movement that was inherent to everything he did. "Leo," he said, and my name in his voice, a deep baritone, was a physical thing. It settled in my chest, warm and heavy. "Mr. Vance," I replied, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. "Julian," he corrected gently, his eyes holding mine for a fraction of a second too long. They were a startling shade of gray, like a storm brewing over a winter sea. "We're off the clock. Shall we?" He gestured toward the elevator, a small, polite movement that felt like a command. We rode down the 30 floors in a silence that was thick with everything I couldn't say. I focused on the changing numbers above the door, on the faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something else, something clean and spicy, on the almost imperceptible sound of his breathing beside me. He was so close. The space felt charged, electric, and I was terrified that if I moved, I would somehow spark a fire. The Cypress Room was exactly the kind of place I had expected. Dimly lit, hushed, and expensive. The air smelled of old wood, beeswax, and money. A hostess with a practiced smile led us to a secluded booth in the back, upholstered in dark leather. It was intimate. Too intimate. My anxiety, which had been a dull throb, sharpened into a piercing ache. This didn't feel like a working dinner. It felt like something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for. Julian slid into the booth opposite me, the leather sighing under his weight. He didn't look at the menu. He just looked at me, his gray eyes unreadable in the low light. "Thank you for coming, Leo. I know it was short notice." "Of course," I managed, my voice still a stranger in my own throat. "Project Nightingale is a priority." I clung to the word project like a life raft. It was safe. It was professional. It was the only reason I was allowed to be here, sitting across from him. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "It is," he agreed. "But that's not the only reason we're here." The waiter appeared then, a silent, efficient ghost who took our drink orders. Julian ordered a whiskey, neat. I, in a moment of panic, ordered the same, even though I hated the stuff. It felt like a test I had to pass. When the waiter left, the silence returned, heavier this time. I fiddled with the starched napkin in my lap, my gaze fixed on the flickering candle in the center of the table. I could feel his eyes on me, a steady, unnerving pressure. I felt dissected, laid bare under that quiet scrutiny. I was acutely aware of every flaw. The way my hair never stayed in place, the worn cuff on my shirt, the nervous tremor in my hand. "Tell me about yourself, Leo," he said, his voice soft, yet it cut through the restaurant's murmur like a knife. The question was so simple, so direct, it completely disarmed me. "Myself," I echoed, stalling. "There's not much to tell." I code. I read. "I have a cat who thinks she's a dog." The words tumbled out, clumsy and awkward. I was revealing the mundane architecture of my lonely life. His smile widened slightly, and this time, it did reach his eyes. A crinkle appeared at the corners. "A cat who thinks she's a dog. I like that. What's her name?" "Penelope." The name felt ridiculous on my tongue in this setting. "Penelope," he repeated, tasting the word. "And what do you read?" This was not a working dinner. I knew it with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty. This was an interrogation, a gentle, sophisticated one, but an interrogation nonetheless. He was peeling back the layers of my professional persona, and I didn't know why. I talked about books, about my ridiculous cat, about the neighborhood I lived in. He listened, truly listened, his head tilted slightly, his gaze never leaving my face. He asked follow-up questions, his interest seeming genuine. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Our drinks arrived. I took a sip of the whiskey, the burn a welcome shock to my system. It grounded me. Julian held his glass, swirling the amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. The sound was hypnotic. He was a man of deliberate, unhurried movements. Everything he did seemed to have weight and purpose, even the way he held his glass. We ordered food, and the conversation drifted back to Project Nightingale, but the tone had shifted. It was no longer a boss talking to a subordinate. It was two people sharing a meal. He valued my opinions, not just on the code, but on the project's ethical implications, its potential for growth. He treated me like a peer, an equal, and that, more than anything else, was what started to unravel me. The professional distance I had so carefully maintained began to dissolve. I found myself relaxing, the rigid posture I'd held since entering the restaurant softening. I gestured with my hands as I talked, a habit I usually suppressed in professional settings. At one point, my hand came to rest on the table, palm down, near the flickering candle. I was explaining a complex algorithm, my fingers tracing the invisible logic in the air and then settling on the white tablecloth. That's when it happened. Julian had been listening intently, his chin resting on his hand. As I finished my point, he didn't speak. Instead, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached across the small table. My breath hitched in my throat. I watched his hand, large and steady, as it approached mine. The world seemed to slow down, the background noise of the restaurant fading to a dull roar. His fingers, warm and firm, brushed against the back of my hand. It was a jolt, a current of electricity that shot up my arm and straight to my heart. I froze. My mind went completely blank. This is it. This is the moment I get fired for some unspoken transgression. But he didn't pull away. His hand settled over mine, his fingers gently closing around it. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a comforting pat. It was a possessive, unequivocal claim. And then, he did something that shattered the last of my composure. With a slow, languid movement, he moved my hand. He slid it across the tablecloth, away from the center of the table and closer to him, until it rested on the leather of the booth beside his thigh. He didn't let go. His hand remained over mine, a warm, heavy weight. A brand. I stared at our joined hands, at the contrast between his tanned, capable fingers and my own pale, slender ones. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only feel the heat of his skin, the slight pressure of his thumb as it began to stroke, back and forth, over my knuckles. I finally dragged my eyes up to his face. His expression was unchanged. He was still watching me with those intense, unreadable gray eyes. There was no teasing glint, no hint of a joke. There was just waiting. He was waiting for my reaction. My mouth was dry. I swallowed, the sound loud in the sudden, ringing silence between us. "Julian," I whispered, the name a question, a plea, a surrender. He didn't answer. He just continued that slow, mesmerizing stroke of his thumb over my knuckles. The simple, repetitive motion was doing things to my insides that I couldn't begin to process. It was a statement, a confession, and a question all rolled into one silent gesture. And in that moment, sitting in the hushed intimacy of the Cypress room, with my boss's hand holding mine beside his thigh, the carefully constructed walls of my world came crashing down. The pretense was over. This was not a working dinner. My mind raced, trying to find purchase on a single coherent thought. All I could feel was the thrum of my own blood, a frantic rhythm that matched the slow, deliberate stroke of his thumb. Every nerve ending in my hand was on fire, broadcasting signals of heat and pressure directly to the core of my being. I was hyper-aware of everything. The faint rasp of his skin against mine, the solid weight of his palm, the way his fingers curled possessively around the edge of my hand. It was an anchor in a swirling vortex of confusion and burgeoning hope. Hope. It was a dangerous, terrifying thing. For years, my feelings for Julian had been a passive, dormant creature, something I fed with stolen glances and distant observations. I had never allowed myself to hope. Hope implied possibility, and possibility was a landscape I was too afraid to explore. Now, that landscape was being laid out before me, and I had no map. "He's just being friendly," a desperate, rational part of my brain insisted. "It's a European thing. A power move. A mistake." But the arguments were flimsy, transparent. There was nothing friendly or accidental about this. The gesture was too calculated, too intimate. The way he moved my hand, placing it exactly where he wanted it, was an act of ownership. He was taking, not asking. I looked around the restaurant, a sudden wave of paranoia washing over me. Did anyone see? The other patrons were lost in their own worlds, their faces soft and indistinct in the candlelight. We were in our own bubble, a pocket of charged air and unspoken words. The waiter approached our table, a phantom of professional discretion. I instinctively tried to pull my hand back, a jolt of panic seizing me. Julian's grip tightened, not painfully, but with an unyielding firmness that rooted me in place. He held my hand, and my gaze, as he spoke to the waiter. "We'll have the check," he said, his voice as calm and steady as ever. He didn't glance at our joined hands. He didn't acknowledge the flagrant breach of every professional and social boundary imaginable. He acted as if this was the most natural thing in the world, as if holding his employee's hand in a public restaurant was just another Tuesday. The waiter, to his credit, didn't so much as blink. He simply nodded and disappeared. My respect for the man's poker face was immense. My own face felt like it was on fire. I was sure I was glowing red in the dim light. "Julian," I said again, my voice barely a whisper. I had to say something. The silence was becoming a physical pressure, crushing the air from my lungs. He finally turned his full attention back to me, his gray eyes searching my face. "Leo," he said, his voice low and soft. He squeezed my hand gently. "Breathe." It was such a simple command, but it was exactly what I needed. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a shaky, uneven sigh. The simple act of breathing seemed to clear some of the fog from my brain. "What is this?" I asked, the words raw. It was a gamble. He could laugh it off, release my hand, and pretend the whole thing was a bizarre misunderstanding. The thought sent a shard of ice through my chest. The idea of returning to the old dynamic, of pretending this electric current between us didn't exist, was suddenly unbearable. He didn't laugh. His expression remained serious, his gaze unwavering. He lifted our joined hands from the leather seat, bringing them to rest in the middle of the table, in the full, soft glow of the candlelight. He turned my hand over, his thumb now tracing the lines of my palm. The sensation was exquisitely intimate. It felt like he was reading a secret language written on my skin. "This," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through our point of contact, "is me, being tired of pretending." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Tired of pretending. It implied there was something to pretend about. It implied that the one-sided fascination I had nurtured in secret wasn't one-sided at all. It implied that while I had been observing him, he had been observing me right back. The thought was staggering. It recontextualized every brief meeting, every shared glance in the hallway, every time he had called my name. The waiter returned with the check. Julian released my hand to sign the bill, and the sudden loss of contact was a physical ache. My hand felt cold and empty on the table. He signed with a swift, decisive flick of his wrist. Then his hand immediately found mine again, lacing his fingers through mine. This time, it felt different. Less like a claim and more like a connection. An agreement. We walked out of the restaurant side by side, our hands still clasped between us. The cool night air was a shock after the warmth of the restaurant. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, seemed amplified. My senses were heightened, everything sharp and vivid. I was intensely aware of the rough texture of his palm against mine, the way our arms brushed together as we walked. His car was parked just down the street, a sleek, dark sedan that was as understated and elegant as the man himself. He opened the passenger door for me before walking around to the driver's side. The gesture was so old-fashioned, so gentlemanly, it made my head spin. Inside the car, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't fraught with tension. It was filled with a quiet, humming anticipation. The air smelled of leather and his cologne, a scent that was quickly becoming synonymous with the complete upheaval of my life. He started the car, but didn't pull away from the curb. He just sat there, his hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the streetlights painting stripes across the windshield. I watched his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his brow was slightly furrowed in thought. "I've handled this badly," he said, his voice quiet. "This was not the time or the place. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable." Uncomfortable wasn't the right word. Terrified, elated, bewildered, electrified. All of those were closer to the truth. "I wasn't uncomfortable," I said, and was surprised to find that it was true. The initial shock had given way to a strange sense of rightness, of inevitability. He turned to look at me, and in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see the vulnerability in his eyes. It was a crack in the stoic facade, a glimpse of the man behind the CEO. It was breathtaking. "For 3 years, Leo," he began, his voice raspy with an emotion I couldn't name. "I've watched you. I've watched you work. I've watched you think. You have this quiet intensity. You get lost in what you're doing, and the rest of the world just falls away. I found myself wanting to be the thing you were focused on." My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. He had seen me. Not just the competent analyst, but me. The overthinker, the daydreamer, the man who got lost in lines of code because it was safer than getting lost in the real world. I told myself it was inappropriate. He continued, his gaze dropping to my hands, which were clenched in my lap. "I'm your boss. There are a dozen reasons why this is a terrible idea. But Project Nightingale, it put us in closer proximity. More meetings, more one-on-one time. And I found my resolve slipping." He reaches out, his hand hovering in the space between us for a moment before he gently pries one of my fists open, his fingers smoothing over my tense knuckles. His touch is warm and reassuring. It calms the frantic fluttering in my stomach. "Tonight," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand again, that same mesmerizing rhythm. "When you were talking about that algorithm, you were so passionate. Your eyes were lit up, and I couldn't maintain the distance anymore. I had to know." "Know what?" I whispered, my voice thick. His eyes met mine, and the intensity in them stole the breath from my lungs. "If there was any chance," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "that when I look at you, you feel even a fraction of what I do. Here it is. The precipice. The moment where I can step back into the safety of my old life or leap into the terrifying, exhilarating unknown. The fear is still there, a cold knot in my gut. Fear of rejection, fear of complications, fear of what this could mean for my career, for my carefully ordered life. But underneath the fear, a stronger feeling is blooming. A wild, defiant hope. The feeling of being truly seen for the first time. I am not a man of grand gestures. I am a man of quiet thoughts and careful words. So I don't say anything. I just lift my other hand and place it over his, sandwiching his hand between both of mine. I hold on, a silent answer to his unspoken question. A slow smile spreads across his face. It's a real smile this time, one that transforms his entire expression, erasing the lines of stress and authority, leaving only a soft, unguarded warmth. Leo, he breathes, my name a sound of pure relief. He leans across the center console, his movements still slow and deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I don't. I stay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, my eyes locked on his. He stops when his face is just inches from mine. I can feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. He smells of whiskey and that intoxicating cologne and something that is just uniquely, elementally him. Is this okay? He asks, his voice a gravelly whisper. It's the question he should have asked in the restaurant. A question of consent, of permission. And my answer is not a word, but an action. I close the small distance between us. The first touch of our lips is hesitant, soft. It's a question. My lips are clumsy, inexperienced against his. But he doesn't rush. He lets me set the pace. I press a little deeper, a silent confirmation, and he responds with a soft sigh, his lips parting slightly. The kiss deepens, and it's nothing like I could have ever imagined. It's not a frantic, desperate thing. It's slow and thorough and breathtakingly tender. It tastes of whiskey and promises and years of unspoken yearning. His hand leaves mine to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him. My own hands come up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palms. It's a mirror of my own, a frantic, thudding rhythm. The kiss is a conversation, a confession. It says all the things we couldn't say with words. It says, I see you. I want you. I have been waiting for you. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb strokes the sensitive skin behind my ear, sending shivers down my spine. Wow. I whisper, the word inadequate. He chuckles, a low, rumbling sound that I feel in my chest. Yeah, he agrees. Wow. We stay like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together in the quiet intimacy of the car, the city lights blurring into soft focus around us. The world outside doesn't matter. The office, the project, the potential complications, they all fade away. There is only this. The warmth of his skin, the sound of his breathing, the lingering taste of him on my lips. The feeling of having jumped and realizing, with a dizzying sense of wonder, that I was not falling. I was being caught. He finally pulls back, though his hand remains on my neck, a warm, grounding presence. He starts the car again, the engine a low purr. I should get you home, he says, though his voice is laced with a reluctance that mirrors my own. I don't want this to end. I want to stay in this bubble, this new reality we've just created. The drive to my apartment is a comfortable silence. He keeps one hand on the steering wheel, the other finds mine again, our fingers laced together on the center console. I watch the city lights slide by, feeling a sense of surreal peace. Just a few hours ago, I was sitting in my sterile cubicle, dreading this dinner. Now, I am sitting beside the man who has occupied my thoughts for 3 years, his hand in mine, the ghost of his kiss still on my lips. Life is a strange and unpredictable thing. He pulls up in front of my building, a modest brick walk-up that suddenly feels shabby and small in the presence of his expensive car. He cuts the engine, and the silence returns, filled with unspoken questions about what happens next. I don't want to go, I admit, the words quiet but firm. It's the boldest thing I've said all night. He turns to me, his expression soft in the dim light. I don't want you to. He brings my hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. The gesture is so tender it makes my heart ache. But we have work in the morning, and we need to think about how we handle this. He's right, of course. Practicality. Reality. They're waiting just outside the car door. The thought sends a familiar chill of anxiety through me. How do we handle this? How do we go from this to sitting in a conference room tomorrow morning, pretending nothing has changed? He must see the worry on my face, because his thumb begins its soothing motion on the back of my hand again. Hey, he says gently, drawing my attention back to him. We will figure it out. Together, the word together is a promise. A balm on my frayed nerves. I'm not going to let this go, Leo. Not after waiting this long. I nod, a lump forming in my throat. I believe him. There is a steadfastness about Julian, a sense of unwavering purpose. When he decides on a course of action, he sees it through, and it seems he has decided on me. He leans in and gives me one last, soft kiss. It's chaste, a gentle press of lips, but it's filled with all the intensity of the first one. Good night, Leo, he murmurs against my mouth. Good night, Julian, I whisper back. Getting out of the car and walking up to my apartment feels like waking from a dream. I close my door behind me, leaning against it, my heart still pounding. My apartment is silent, the only light the blinking red eye of the smoke detector. Penelope, my cat who thinks she's a dog, twines around my legs, purring loudly. I reach down and scoop her up, holding her close. Her solid, furry weight is a comforting anchor to reality. You are not going to believe what just happened, I whisper into her fur. She just purrs louder. I don't sleep much that night. I lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. The way he looked at me across the table. The shock of his hand covering mine. The words, tired of pretending. The taste of his kiss. It all feels too good to be true, like a fantasy my lonely mind has concocted. I keep touching my lips, half expecting to find that the feeling was just a figment of my imagination. But it's real. It happened. The next morning, walking into the office is one of the hardest things I've ever done. The familiar environment suddenly feels alien, a stage for a play where I no longer know my lines. Every mundane detail, the hum of the servers, the smell of stale coffee, the cheerful greeting from the receptionist, feels discordant with the seismic shift that has occurred within me. I am a different person than the one who left this building yesterday, but no one else knows it. I make it to my cubicle, my sanctuary of anonymity, and sink into my chair, my body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. I stare at my monitor, at the lines of code I was working on yesterday. They look like a foreign language. How can I focus on Project Nightingale when its architect has completely rewritten the code of my life? I'm so lost in my anxious thoughts that I don't hear him approach. Morning, Leo. His voice, low and close to my ear, sends a jolt through my entire body. I whip my head around to see him standing there, leaning against the wall of my cubicle. He's holding 2 cups of coffee. He's dressed in his usual impeccable suit, the picture of a powerful CEO. But his eyes are just for me. There's a warmth in them, a private smile that makes my stomach do a nervous flip. Julian, I stammer, my face heating up. Mr. Vance. Good morning. I can feel the eyes of my nearby coworkers on us. Julian rarely comes down to the bullpen. His presence here is an anomaly, a disruption to the natural order of things. He places one of the coffee cups on my desk. I thought you might need this, he says, his voice pitched low enough for only me to hear. You look like you didn't get much sleep. I was up late. Working. I lie, the words feeling clumsy on my tongue. His smile widens slightly. He knows I'm lying. Of course, he says, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment too long. My office. 10 minutes. It's an order, but his tone is soft. He straightens up and walks away, leaving me with a rapidly beating heart and a cup of coffee that I know, without even tasting it, is exactly how I like it. The walk to his office is a green mile. I can feel the curious stares of my colleagues. Why is the big boss singling out Leo? I can almost hear them thinking. My hands are sweating. I feel like a teenager being called to the principal's office after being caught holding hands with someone I shouldn't have. Carol, his assistant, gives me a brief, professional nod as I approach. He's waiting for you, she says, her tone as clipped as her emails. Julian's office is on the corner, with panoramic views of the city. It's minimalist and immaculate, all glass and steel and dark wood. He's standing by the window, looking out at the skyline, his back to me. Close the door, he says, without turning around. I do as he says, the soft click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. He turns to face me then, and the professional mask is gone. He looks tired, but there's a soft light in his eyes. That was difficult, he says, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the bullpen. pretending not to know you, pretending not to want to. He trails off, taking a step towards me. I know, I say, my voice barely a whisper. Everyone was staring. Let them stare, he says, his voice firm. He closes the remaining distance between us, stopping just a foot away. He doesn't touch me, but I can feel the heat radiating from his body. I didn't bring you in here to talk about work, Leo. Oh, I say intelligently. He huffs out a small laugh. No, I brought you in here because I wanted to see you. And because I needed to make sure you were okay. That last night wasn't a mistake. This is it. The reassurance. The morning after confirmation that my world hasn't been turned upside down for nothing. It wasn't a mistake, I say, and the certainty in my own voice surprises me. The anxiety, the fear, they're still there, buzzing under the surface. But my desire for this, for him, is stronger. It was the most real thing that's happened to me in a very long time. The relief that washes over his face is profound. It's like watching a great weight being lifted from his shoulders. Good, he breathes. That's good. He takes another step, closing the last bit of space between us. He lifts a hand, his knuckles gently grazing my cheek. The touch is feather-light, but it sends a cascade of warmth through my entire body. I want to take you to dinner again. Somewhere far away from here. Somewhere we don't have to pretend. I'd like that, I say, my voice thick with emotion. But first, he murmurs, his gaze dropping to my lips. We have a 10-minute meeting. His other hand comes up to rest on my waist, his fingers splayed against the small of my back, pulling me gently against him. And then he kisses me, right there in his glass-walled office with the entire city as our witness. It's different from last night's kiss. It's more confident, more certain. It's a kiss of possession, a kiss that says you are mine. And as I kiss him back, my hands coming up to grip his shoulders, I realize with a dizzying, terrifying, wonderful clarity that I am completely, irrevocably his. The project, the office, the rest of the world, it all falls away. There is only the two of us, in this glass tower, at the start of something new and terrifying and beautiful. We had 10 minutes. It wasn't nearly enough. It was the beginning of everything. The next few weeks were a strange, exhilarating dance of duality. By day, we were Mr. Vance and Leo, the CEO and his lead analyst. We communicated through professional emails and formal meetings. I would sit across from him at the long conference table, my leg bouncing nervously under the polished wood, my heart performing a frantic staccato every time his gray eyes met mine. He was a master of control, his expression perfectly neutral, his tone professional. But there were moments, tiny fissures in the facade, that were meant only for me. A look that lingered a fraction of a second too long. The way his thumb would brush his lower lip when he was listening to me speak, a gesture I now knew was one of restraint. A brief, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement when I presented my findings. These were our secret conversations, conducted in a language no one else in the room could understand. And then there was the night. The night was ours. After the office emptied and the city lights began to glitter, the pretense would fall away. He would text me a simple ready, and I would meet him in the underground garage, my heart pounding with the thrill of the clandestine. We explored the city's hidden corners, hole-in-the-wall restaurants where no one would know the powerful Julian Vance. We talked for hours, not about work, but about everything. About his childhood on a farm in the Midwest, a life so different from the one he now lived. About my quiet passion for old black-and-white films. He confessed a surprising fear of heights, which I found absurdly endearing for a man who worked on the 30th floor. I told him about my estranged father, a story I had never told anyone else. He was an incredible listener. He had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world, his focus absolute and unwavering. He would watch me with that same quiet intensity he had in the restaurant, but now I understood it. It wasn't scrutiny, it was fascination. And the more I revealed of my quiet, unremarkable self, the more fascinated he seemed to be. The physical side of our relationship unfolded with the same slow, deliberate pace as everything else with Julian. Our kisses became longer, deeper, more searching. He was a man of exquisite patience. He seemed to derive as much pleasure from a simple touch as from a passionate embrace. He loved to hold my hand, his thumb stroking my palm as we walked down a darkened street. He would trace the line of my jaw with his fingertip, his touch sending shivers through me. He learned the landscape of my body with a reverent curiosity, discovering the sensitive spot behind my ear, the way a hand on the small of my back could make me melt. One Friday night, after a particularly grueling week working on a critical deadline for Nightingale, he drove me not to my apartment, but out of the city. The urban sprawl gave way to winding country roads, the darkness punctuated only by our headlights and the distant stars. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice soft in the quiet car. "Somewhere we don't have to worry about tomorrow morning," he replied, his profile etched against the passing trees. He pulled up to a small, modern cabin nestled in a grove of pine trees. It was all clean lines and dark wood, with a wall of glass that looked out into the forest. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was a world away from the concrete and steel of our daily lives. "This is mine," he said, cutting the engine. "I come here when the city gets to be too much." Inside, it was warm and inviting. A fire was already laid in the stone fireplace. The space was open and uncluttered, furnished with comfortable-looking leather armchairs and shelves filled with books. It felt like him, solid, elegant, and private. That weekend was a turning point. There were no deadlines, no emails, no prying eyes. There was just us. We cooked together in the small, well-equipped kitchen, our bodies brushing against each other in the narrow space. We went for long walks in the woods, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under our feet and the sound of our own breathing. We sat by the fire at night, drinking wine and talking until our voices were hoarse. It was there, in the quiet solitude of the cabin, that he first told me he loved me. We were lying in bed, the moonlight streaming through the large window, painting silver stripes across the sheets. He was propped up on one elbow, looking down at me, his fingers gently tracing patterns on my chest. "I love you, Leo," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. The words were simple, direct, and utterly devastating. They landed in my chest with a gentle weight, filling all the empty spaces I didn't even know I had. Tears pricked my eyes. I, who had always been so careful with my heart, so guarded with my emotions, was completely undone. "I love you too," I whispered back, the words feeling both terrifying and wonderfully, liberatingly true. He leaned down and kissed me, a kiss that was filled with all the tenderness and passion and quiet understanding that had grown between us. It was a seal, a promise. In the silence of the forest, under the watchful gaze of the moon, our secret relationship solidified into something real, something with the potential to last. But reality, as it always does, came crashing back. On Monday morning, the cabin felt like a dream, and the office was a harsh, fluorescent reality. The duality of our lives became harder to maintain. Knowing what we shared in private made the public pretense feel more like a lie. The stolen glances across the conference room felt less thrilling and more frustrating. The professional distance felt like a chasm. The gossip started subtly. A few whispers by the coffee machine. A curious look from Carol when I left Julian's office. Project Nightingale had been a success, and I was given a promotion. It was deserved. I had worked tirelessly, but the timing was suspect to anyone looking for a story. I heard the word favorite whispered in the hallway. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work, but the whispers were like a poison, seeping into my confidence, making me question everything. I started to pull back, a reflexive, self-protective instinct. I became more formal in my emails to Julian. I avoided being alone with him in the office, making excuses to have other team members present in our meetings. I was terrified of a single misstep, a single glance that would give us away and ruin everything. Not just for me. I could find another job, but for him. He had built this company from the ground up. His reputation was everything. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One evening, he called me into his office after everyone else had gone home. The blinds were drawn, creating a sense of privacy. He didn't ask me to sit. He just stood in front of his desk, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong, Leo?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Nothing," I said too quickly. "I'm just busy. The new role is a lot of work." "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice dropping. It wasn't angry, but it was sharp with an intensity that made me flinch. "I can feel you pulling away. Talk to me." And so, it all came tumbling out. The whispers, the stares, the fear of being discovered, the crushing weight of the secrecy. They think I only got the promotion because of you. I finished, my voice thick with shame. They think I'm your pet project. He listened patiently, his expression never changing. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment. Then he walked around his desk and came to stand in front of me. He took my hands in his grip firm and steady. "Do you know why I started this company, Leo?" he asked. I shook my head. "Because I was tired of working in places where who you were mattered more than the quality of your work. I wanted to build a place where merit was the only thing that counted." He squeezed my hands. "You earned that promotion. You were the most brilliant analyst I have ever worked with. Your work on Nightingale was groundbreaking. That is why you were promoted. And if anyone in this company has a problem with that, they can come and talk to me directly." His words were a balm, soothing the raw, insecure parts of my soul. But the bigger problem remained. "But what about us?" I asked, my voice small. "Julian, if people found out." "Then they find out," he said, his voice ringing with a certainty that stunned me. "Leo, I spent years building a life that was safe, respectable, and empty. I had success. I had respect. And I was profoundly lonely. And then you came along. You, with your quiet intensity and your brilliant mind and your ridiculous cat. You filled a space in my life I didn't even know was empty." He lifted a hand to my cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "I am not going to hide you," he said, his voice fierce. "I am not going to sneak around in the dark. I love you, and I am not ashamed of that. If I have to choose between my reputation and you, I choose you. Every single time." I stared at him, my heart aching with a love so fierce it almost hurt. This man, this powerful, brilliant, steadfast man, was willing to risk everything for me. In that moment, my fear seemed small and insignificant in the face of his love. He smiled, a soft, gentle thing. "So we have a choice. We can continue this dance, letting the fear and the whispers dictate our lives. Or," he said, his eyes gleaming with a hint of the confident man who had taken my hand in the restaurant, "we can write our own rules." "What are you saying?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound with a new kind of anticipation. Not of fear, but of hope. "I'm saying," he said, leaning in, his lips just a breath from mine, "that there's a company dinner next month. A formal affair. Spouses and partners are invited." He paused, his gaze searching mine. "I want you to come. With me." It was a terrifying proposition. To walk into a room full of our colleagues, not as boss and employee, but as partners. To lay our secret bare for all to see. It was a leap of faith, a jump from the highest cliff. But as I looked into his steady, loving eyes, I knew I wouldn't be jumping alone. He would be there to catch me. "Okay," I whispered. "Yes, okay." He kissed me then, a kiss that was not about passion, but about promise. It was a kiss that sealed our decision, a kiss that marked the end of the fear and the beginning of our future. A future out in the open, together. It was the scariest thing I had ever agreed to, and I couldn't wait.